Hello and welcome to my channel. Today's video is how I make my trays. And first I'm going to show you some examples of the trays that I already made. I actually did a video where I made this first tray. I decoupaged the bottom of it. So they're all different sizes and it's really based on the materials that I have already on hand. The bases of the trays, the bottom, are just a plywood. So I have a couple different stacks of sizes of plywood, so I'll pull whatever I have out. Sometimes I cut them down a little bit and sometimes I don't. And then for the sides, I will use whatever I have again. Most of the time I'll use like a 1x2 or a tobacco stick, something like that. So I can use various materials on them. This is the tray we're going to make today. The base of this tray is 8 inches by 20 inches by 8 inches. And then the sides are made out of 1x2s. I've sanded everything down. I always do that before I start my projects, and then I sand the projects again after they're assembled. Okay, so when I start a project, I measure the sides first, the short sides first, and I make sure that I have those to where they're going to fit. So in this case, I measured 8 inches, and then I cut the two sides. And then what I'll do is that long piece for the front and the back, you're not going to want to cut it to the length of your base because you're going to have to cut it a little bit longer to cover those two side pieces. So what I do is I cut my short side pieces and then I kind of hold those up and I measure just so I get the exact measurement for the back and the front. All right, so once I've got all my measurements, I cut my pieces and now I'm just assembling that last piece. I use my battery operated nailer here, but if you didn't have one of those, you could certainly just use regular hammer and nails, or you could clamp it down after applying the wood glue. For this tray particularly, I'm going to distress it with some white paint. So I'm going to sand it first after it was put together. Then I'm going to give it a coat of this matte, ultra matte black spray paint. Now I am mixing up some chalk paint, and how I do that is I take my regular white paint, put a little bit of water in there to water it down a little bit, and then I will add some plaster of Paris, and that's how I make my chalk paint. I also make it with baking soda sometimes, but this particular moment I would use the plaster of Paris. So I am putting a coat of this white paint onto my project. Now the plywood, even though it's been coated with that spray paint, the plywood absorbs the paint differently than these side pieces. So it actually looks a little bit more thin on the plywood part than it does the sides, I think. Whenever I was putting it on, you could definitely tell the difference. But it's not going to matter because we're going to sand the whole thing down and distress it when we're finished. So as long as it has a nice, pretty even coat of white paint, no big runs or anything, you should be perfectly fine. So covered the whole thing with some white paint. You don't have to use chalk paint, but I just did this time. Now that we have it all painted, we're going to take our sandpaper and we're going to sand it. I usually use an electric sander, but I did it by hand this time. And then I went ahead and took my shop vac and got all that debris out of there because I don't want that stuff under my transfer. There's a couple different ways that I put transfers on. I use tissue paper, and I also use like a reverse transfer method with my laser printer and just a regular piece of copy paper. But for today, we're going to use one of those tissue paper transfers, and it's a holiday themed one. It's Frosties. I don't even know what it is now, but it's a frosty one. So it'd be like a cute hot cocoa tray for the holidays and for winter time. I am using Minwax water-based sealer. And I am just putting and I actually use matte finish, but it really wouldn't matter. But I use the matte finish. I put a nice thin coat down on the whole base bottom of the tray. Not just where my transfer is, but the whole thing. And then I lay my transfer down and gently just kind of pat it down and press out the bubbles and the wrinkles and things like that. You have to be careful with this. I mean, it is somewhat durable, but if you start pulling and yanking too hard whenever you're trying to push out the bubbles and the little crinkles, then it could come up on you or rip. After that it's completely dry, I put a coat of the water-based sealer all over the project, back over the transfer, over the top, over the whole thing. And I do this because let's say you're using this for a hot cocoa tray and someone spills something on it or whatever, you're going to want to be able to wipe it off. So if we put a coat of sealer on it, that way when you go to wipe it off, the paint's not coming off and it's not a big disaster. So that's why I seal my projects in this way. We're going to apply some handles to this. If you'll notice right now, it kind of looks like a sign. So if you wanted to make a sign, you could just leave it like this. I probably, if I was going to make a sign, I would probably leave the sides black, but you know. Okay, back to the tray. I'm applying handles. I got these handles at Hobby Lobby and I spray painted them black, and I just pre-drilled the holes. I screwed the handles onto the project, and then this is a little mini marshmallow container. This is what it looks like in the end. It's so cute and I love it. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.